Welcome to the Surrendered Strength Radio. As Christian men, we are called to surrender our lives to Jesus. To surrender to Jesus means to give in, not to give up. We are called to use our strengths, abilities, and opportunities to grow and prosper. We are called to strengthen ourselves, our families, and our communities. We are called to encourage and lift up our brothers in Christ. We are called to honor and glorify God in all things. To surrender our strengths, we must live to a higher standard. We must live with strength, courage, and honor, to love God and to love others as ourselves. This is Surrendered Strength. What's up, men? Welcome back to another episode of the Surrendered Strength Radio. I am excited. My guest today is just jumping on, I see. So I will let him. There he is. Antoine.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing this Saturday morning?
I am doing well. It's a little chilly here in Iowa, but it is beautiful. So how are things where you are? Where are you actually?
So I am in McKinney, Texas, just north of Dallas, about 40 minutes north of Dallas. And it's actually a little cold here. Not too bad, but colder than like what Texans would like to consider nice weather. So
understandable. I was just starting the introduction. Men, today I have Antoine joining me from Humble Husband. And this is our first time talking for the most part. So why don't you give an introduction of who you are and maybe a little history of how you came to start Humble Husband.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, before I, keep it moving, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk with you and share. Like we kind of talked, over like messaging back and forth. Like I absolutely love what you're doing as well, and it's just so cool to partner with other men in the kingdom that are just, doing their part to build God's church. So it's so cool to talk with you this morning. So yeah, like I said, my name is Antoine, and I am the CEO and founder of Humble Husband. And a little bit about me: I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a worship pastor with Life Church. And I think, man, when you sit on interviews with people and like when you're talking with people, I think it's so funny. I think what the listener oftentimes is thinking is like, is this person that is talking right now a regular person? And I absolutely am. I'm absolutely a regular person. I'm a man. I deal with stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like I have struggles, but at the same time, I know who my Redeemer is in Jesus. So Humble Husband, kind of transitioning into that, really started as this burden. Literally in 2016 in San Antonio, Texas, I was sitting on our couch in the living room. Like I remember it seriously like it was yesterday. Yeah. And I saw, unfortunately, this couple that I'd known, they were going through a divorce. And just kind of the communication back and forth on Facebook, unfortunately, was just really unhealthy and really toxic. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm so tired of that. Like, I'm so tired of people just like not doing relationships well. And furthermore, even if there's going to be an ending point in that relationship, how do we handle that in such a way that is not super toxic and it doesn't like discourage people who really are trying to do this thing well? Not that I'm definitely advocating for divorce or anything, but I'm just like, man, there's got to be a better way to talk about relationships. So from that kind of like stirred this like awareness, if you will, of like, it was like everywhere I went, I saw like relationship dysfunction. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like I couldn't not see it. And within that, I feel like the Holy Spirit was working on my heart. And it was just like, you care about this. And I put this in you. What are you going to do about it? So I began, this was like probably like a couple of months where I kind of sat on this idea of like, what if we had a platform for marriages, and specifically from the male point of view? Because I think oftentimes we talk about couples and we talk about both sides. And to be very honest, I feel like there's a lot of content for women, a lot of great content for women and wives and motherhood. I don't feel like there's an equal amount for men and for manhood and for what it means to be a husband. And just felt like we've got to do something about that. We've got to give some voicing to the other side of this conversation of what it means to be a man. Like, we're not all buffoons out here. We're not all clueless. And the other side of that extreme, unfortunately, there's a stigma of like men are just angry all the time, and we are short-sighted and short-tempered, and we're emotionless. And I'm like, that's not true at all. And the second part of that is that doesn't reflect the heart of God. So so that sparked an idea of like, how do we do marriage as well? And how do we talk about this and create a platform from the male perspective?
That's awesome. And you are right. It is sad and crazy how men are portrayed in our society. And as men of God, we're not perfect, but we are certainly not what is being portrayed. So we definitely need more platforms to show that this is who men of God really are, and to just help and encourage other men to go in that direction as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was looking through some content, and when it comes to being a husband and leading, you mentioned leading, I've been married for 5 years now, and this is one of the areas where I struggled extremely early on, and I've gotten better. Still have lots of room to improve, but I've gotten better. But one of the posts I saw you talk about leading as a husband, talk about 3 things: love, compassion, and consistency. I would love for you to just talk about each one of those 3, and how it relates to leading as a husband.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and I love that you use that post, because I remember that. I remember like crafting that. And honestly, a lot of our content comes from like things that we'll see, and we'll just like, we got to talk about it. So it's not like, me, and I got to shout out Daniel, who is the CFO of Humble Husband as well, who's not here this morning with me, but he and I go back and forth on content a lot. And we're just like, a lot of it is like out of this need of like, oh, we saw this crazy thing, and like, let's talk about it. And then what's the Bible's answer to that? Like, what's the truth that is opposing that lie? So anyway, so love, like, one of my favorite marriage curriculum and just ministries that's out there is, I got to shout out Love and Respect by the Edgar Riches. And like, that revolutionized, I think, the conversation on how to not just talk through conflict and things like that, but even just to seek mutual understanding within relationships, even when we feel like we're missing each other as husband and wife. So anyway, from that, I love what he talks about in way of men, and specifically husbands, have to pursue loving their wives. We are not innately going to do that. And I think we don't like to admit that, but we're just not. I will not, in and of myself, just want to be a loving husband towards my wife. I'm just not. So I have to be very intentional about doing that. So the first one in that post is love. Like, if I want to be a good leader, I have to lead with love. Jesus did that, right? Jesus led with love and compassion, which I'll talk about here in a second. And everything he did, even if he spoke truth, which he did, he is truth, he was truth, he did it through the lens, through the filter of love. So we would be crazy to think that we can talk to our wives any kind of way. We could, just do anything and just be like, oh, there's no consequences of that, or there's no, repercussions for that. Like, I have to lead through everything through the lens of love, how I talk to my wife, how I care for her, learning more about who she is and how God's wired her. The second thing in that is compassion. Like, I have to really put myself in this posture of really caring, right? Like, I can't just fake it. I can't just be like, all right, we did date night 6 months ago, we're good, right? You still think that I love you? It's like, no, I have to be compassionate. I have to be willing, like, as a husband, like the Bible says that I have to be willing to die for her. Well, I think the other side of that is I have to also be willing to live for her too. right? In the sense of like crafting my schedule, crafting my time that I want to have for myself, but also making sure that I'm not missing her. And I think compassion comes a long way, because I think you can say you love someone and you can not show compassion at all. You can just say it. And I feel like compassion, though, is the action being coupled with the sentiment, and even with the intent to show that you love her. And then the last one, the biggest one, I would argue, is consistency. Because if I show love, which obviously is the most important, but if I only show love part of the time, then it doesn't look like I really am being intentional about this thing. If I'm only compassionate sometimes when I feel it, and I heard a good word at church, or because I'm a worship leader, you know what I'm saying, I sang this awesome song, and now I feel that I'm in the Spirit of God, and He's moving and things are changing, and I show compassion on Sunday, and then Monday comes around and I'm a jerk again. Like, no. We've got to be consistent. Consistency is me choosing to be disciplined in the things that I actually care about. I'm being consistent. Kind of a funny thing I'll mention, right now, consistency looks like for me as a husband is getting my diet together, my health, my physical health. Like, that has probably been a thing for me my entire life. And then this season, God's like, I want you to focus on your physical health. That is the thing. You need to give that over to me. So consistency is super important if you want a marriage that's thriving, because as seasons change, as we change, as we evolve, as we go from boyfriend and girlfriend to husband and wife to mommy and daddy to career person to whatever in ministry, like for some of us, like all of those things aren't going to just magically like fit into the schedule of, okay, I got to be a husband first. I have to choose that, and I have to set a plan to be consistent in that every day.
Right. Absolutely. And you said, or you mentioned how, Jesus shows love and compassion. And as I was thinking about that love and compassion that he shows parallels, so well how, we are to love our wives and our kids. And it's, just something that really came up when you were thinking about that. And another thing is, as we focus on ourselves, take care of ourselves, if we are just doing that and not showing that love and compassion consistently to our wives, they're not going to benefit. And that's another thing that I learned. If my wife is succeeding, if she's doing well, our marriage is doing well. If I'm succeeding, but I'm not, helping her succeed, our marriage is not doing well. And that was a big thing for me, going from, never being married to married. And it's like, how can we make this work so we're both, thriving and not just one of us.
Right. Right. I think consistency too for me is, I think we often make it this like theoretical thing and like this ambiguous concept, when it's like, no, get practical with it. Like, if you're not waking up like consistently every day at a time where you can spend time with the Lord first, and then out of the overflow of that, be able to love your wife well and show her compassion well, like, then start there. Like, my question would be for anybody listening, would be like, what is that for you? Because oftentimes you missing your wife or y'all not connecting is only a symptom. What is the root of that? What is the root of me not, hearing my wife's heart right now, or seeing her heart, which I do. Even we've been married, we'll celebrate 10 years this year. And I still have to fight to see her heart, because couple of things. Well, one, we're wired differently. My personality is like probably the complete opposite of hers. Number two, we're very different people than we were 15 years ago when we started dating. So I think for anybody who's listening, I would just say, what is that for you? Find the root of whatever you're dealing with right now and start there, and allow God to expose that to you, and be honest about what that is. Like, man, I'm not loving my wife better because I don't love myself. Wow, that's powerful. That's okay though. That's okay to say that, and allow God to minister to you through that. And then even with that, find community with, pages like Surrendered Strength. Come on, somebody.
Absolutely. With consistency, that also reminds me, we are called to consistently, surrender to Jesus, and that's a daily process, as
Yeah.
is loving our wife. And you mentioned, if you're not going to the Lord first in your day, it's going to be a little bit more challenging to love your wife. So you are absolutely correct with the go to the Lord first, and find time for him, because that's just going to flow into the rest of our lives, especially our marriages.
Yeah.
So another post that I saw, transitioning from being a husband to maybe stepping back for us, but there's men out there who are single and hopefully still listening to or trying to learn how to be a husband. I know for me, I was kind of trying to figure out how to be a husband before I was married. I learned a little bit, but I learned a lot more once I got married. One of your posts talks about, dating with no direction only creates baggage that your future wife will have to deal with.
Mm.
And that is so true and so powerful. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah. Wow. So many thoughts with that. I'll try to keep it short, but one of the immediate ones that comes to mind as I'm thinking through that post is, I think oftentimes in dating, especially, we are very short-sighted. So it's like, there's this person right now, and we've got to pursue each other right now, which you should, but it's just like very in the now versus thinking eternal and thinking big picture, right? And even approaching dating from the standpoint of, can we build a life together? Yes, I need to be attracted to you. That's important. Like, if people say that, I think it's crazy when you're like, attraction doesn't matter. No, it does matter, because you got to wake up to that person every day. It does matter. It does. It's not the only thing that matters, but it does matter.
Right.
Do you jive well with this person? Your personality is like, do you guys get along? You should be friends, right? That being said, like, I think there's this thing in dating where it's like, those are the only things that matter, versus thinking through, can I build a life with this person? So dating with no direction just creates baggage. As you date people, in a general sense, as we date people, the more and more we date without direction, one, and as we go through people and they're not our spouse, we're affecting their future spouse, and we're affecting our future spouse. Because if there is not a clear direction of like, hey, we're friends, let's pursue each other. And if at the end of this, if like this isn't what it is, let's be very honest about that, so that way neither one of us gets hurt. We don't approach dating like that.
Right.
We don't. And it's like, what if we did? What if we approached it with a very upfront conversation of like, I like you, you like me, let's see where this can go. And if in the middle of this we're not feeling it, that's okay. It doesn't have to be ugly, doesn't have to be crazy. We don't have to cuss each other out on Facebook. Like, it's okay, or on IG. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so aimlessly dating with no direction creates baggage. Like, I think about how, I'll use myself as an example, like past relationships, how I didn't realize that I suffered the effects of not cleaning up some of those situations, or even healing from some of those situations, and brought that into my marriage. And in an argument, in a miscommunication, even in just trying to be intentional about loving my wife well, not realizing that I was still dealing with a lot of those things from my past relationships. And the quicker I realized that, the faster I was able to allow God to heal me. Now, I'm not perfect. I still have a lot of those things, a lot of those tendencies, but I have an awareness now, and I now understand that God is with me through those things. And the gap of who I once was in a relationship and my thought process on that to who I am and my intentionality as a husband, like, that gap is shortening, and that's all by his grace. So yeah, aimlessly dating with no direction just creates baggage. And I don't think we talk about that in the sense of like, I'm looking for someone who could be my wife, that we're going to build a life together. We think about it as, oh, we're dating right now and we have all the feelings and all the hormones and this is great. And it's like, that's amazing. When all of that settles though, right? Can you build a life with this person?
Right. And having that purpose or long-term thought process goal, I don't think that's a bad thing. And I feel like there might be some people like, oh, well, I just want to go out and have fun. Well, that's good. But like you said, it's going to affect your future. All the things that we do today is going to affect our future. And, that carries over not just in our relationships, but, even you were talking about your health. What we do today is going to affect what we do or what we're able to do tomorrow. And if we look at everything from the perspective of long term and what's the ultimate purpose, to honor God, if we look at everything that way, for me personally, it makes everything that much easier to say, hey, yes, this is something I need to do. Or it makes it easier for us to say, okay, this isn't something that I need to do or want to do, even, whether that's some type of workout or whether that's, going into a relationship with somebody. Because if you can see that they have qualities that you don't necessarily want in a future spouse, if we're looking at the long term, then you can be like, okay, my goal is to honor God. I don't think honoring God is going to be done with maybe someone that's not a believer or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Like the whole unequally yoked thing. Like, yeah, like that's a big one. And I used to look at that when I was younger, man. I used to look at that from like a very legalistic point of view of like, yep, if they don't believe in Jesus, then we can't date. And it's like it's more than that. If I'm called to be like, it is that, but what I'm saying is like, it's also more than that as well, where it's like, if I'm called to go to Africa and be a missionary, and you're called to stay here in the States and do ministry, and we want to get married, that's a conversation we need to talk about. Because if we really feel like the Holy Spirit is leading us in those two very separate directions, then this may not work. And we need to be honest about that. Like, that's just, I think we make it such a awkward conversation because, and for good reason, like oftentimes we're processing those things through our insecurities. And it's like, well, I don't want to feel rejected. That's a very real thing.
Right.
And I don't want you to feel rejected. That's also a very real thing. So we'll like gloss over these very real things of like, well, I do feel like God is calling me to do this. And it's like, well, God feels like he's calling you to do this. So we got to be real about, does it make sense for us to try to pursue each other right now, feeling pulled in very different directions? Because even within the Christian world, even within ministry and even within trying to be Christ followers, that can still be chaotic if we're not on, or, if we're not honest with one another. That can be very chaotic of like, well, you said that you were willing to make it work, but like we're in two separate time zones now. And it's like, well, listen, like so either you commit to that and you work through all of those things, which for my wife and I, we were long distance for a little while. So either you commit to that and make it work, or you got to be very honest about, hey, it may not, and that's okay. Or it could be, right person, wrong season. This may not be the season for us, maybe in a couple years, but right now, this is my focus. And I think, especially as believers, obviously, we've really got to allow God to lead us through these things and have great counsel around us and all of those things, because I think oftentimes, again, we lead through our insecurities. We make decisions out of feeling, which I'm a big feeler, so I'm not saying that's bad, but it's not the only thing, for my thinkers out there as well, like thinking is not all, it's not the only thing, right? So have a good group of people around you to help process those decisions. And I think the whole equally yoked thing is, if they're not a believer, she's not a believer, that's going to be rough. And I would not personally advise that, because if you are trying to run hard after Jesus, you want somebody who's running hard after Jesus with you. Right.
Absolutely.
And with that, are your lives in such a way that y'all can run after Jesus together in a very practical sense? Like, are y'all in the same state? Are y'all in the same county? Are y'all in the same, we got to navigate those things in such a way where we're going towards the same goal, which if the goal is marriage and then to build a life with this person, how do we do that? And how do we run towards that together?
Right. Absolutely. And, that is, what would you say to someone that maybe is in that situation where they're maybe currently dating somebody that, you know, they're a man that is after Jesus, but their wife, or excuse me, girlfriend, maybe they are a believer, but they're not necessarily pursuing Jesus as much, or how would you advise them in that situation?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing I would encourage, which may sound super obvious, but I would pray. Like there's so much prayer that just needs to be over that situation in way in letting or allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to you, but also allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to her. And from that, in a very practical sense, have conversations about it. Like, I feel like, or I think that I'm running hard after Jesus in this direction. What does that look like for you? So what that does is you're not accusing her of your relationship ain't as strong as mine. Like,
Right.
you're not doing that, but you're allowing the space for her to be very honest about where she is. Like, and I think that's okay in a relationship if one person seems to be stronger in their faith. I don't think that's bad. I think where it becomes bad is when there's not conversation about where that person is, because they could trust, they could trust Jesus in one sense, but not trust Jesus in another sense.
Right.
Like for me, for a long time, it was like I trusted God in everything but like finances. I was like, I'm not doing that though. Because for me, talking about money was very triggering growing up. So I had to learn that about that. And there was a cap on my depth in my relationship with God because of that insecurity. So I think I would just say pray and then have great conversation about what you're sensing in this relationship. And again, we make this so awkward. It could be very enlightening because you may be thinking one thing, you're like, oh, wow, that's not even it at all. Like, and then she could be thinking one thing about you and you'd be like, oh, wow, that's not even it at all. And that could be a very enlightening conversation. It does not have to be awkward. And I would say, if you feel like it is, I would like call a pastor, somebody that you trust, a mentor, and process this with them. And before entering into that conversation, because if you really care about this person, you want to see a future with them, and you do believe there is a future with them, you want that conversation to go well. Because it's not an ultimatum. It's not either you're running hard after Jesus like I am, or we're done. Like that's not it.
Yeah.
It's you allow them to share their heart as you share your heart, and from that, see what God wants to do.
Absolutely, that's great advice. And kind of piggybacking off that, you talk about conversation or just communication is so important in any relationship, but especially marriage. What are your I guess any thoughts, tips on how to better communicate with your wife?
Yeah, so I said it earlier. I think Love and Respect is one of the most revolutionary platforms out there for just dealing with conflict, but also leading to mutual understanding. I think communication has been a buzzword for many years when it comes to marriage. So you just got to communicate well. And their argument, if you will, if I use that word, is less about we got to communicate well and we got to seek each other's hearts and we have to understand each other well. So it's not just communication so that way I can hear you. It's communication so I can hear your heart, so we can mutually understand each other, right? So I would say like that is, if you haven't done that, and here's the thing, you don't have to be married to do that. You can be single, because a lot of those tenets and a lot of those just concepts that they talk about are not just husband and wife, but they're also like gender to gender as well. So like how like father to daughter, for instance, like for me, how I relate to my daughter, how my wife relates to our sons, like in like all of those dynamics, me to my mom, like it talks about those dynamics and kind of enlightens you to like, wow, maybe that's why we got in that argument at that one time, is because I felt very disrespected in that conversation. You felt unloved in that conversation, and nobody was wrong. It was just different. So I would say that. Sorry, what was your specific question? Because I got to go on a tangent there.
Yeah, just maybe some best communication tips or
Yes,
something like that.
So from that, I think communication tips, man, I always lead with help me understand. So I think oftentimes communication we talk about it when it's bad, right? Because when it's good communication, you don't really talk about it. It's like, we communicate well, yeah, we're on the same page today. But then we talk about communication usually when there's a tension, when there's a problem. So a lot of times I will lead conversations with help me understand. And my wife knows what that means because we've been married for a little bit now, but it softens the blow of like, hey, I do have a tension, but I'm not accusing you right now. I'm really just trying to understand why you made that decision, or why you spoke to me that way earlier, or why we're missing each other. Help me understand what you're feeling right now. Well, babe, I just felt like earlier when I asked you to take out the trash, you didn't do it. And now I'm just mad. I'm like, oh, got it. First, I need to take out the trash. My bad. You're right. And number two, now I understand why all of our conversations from that moment and since that moment have been weird. So help me understand. And I would say from that, in a more just, in a sense of just getting to know her, like get to know her. We had a post a while back that kind of like talked about getting to know your wife, or even your girlfriend if you're in that stage, like you're getting your degree. So like, when you go to school, you get your credits and you get your associate's degree, and then you build upon that and you get your bachelor's degree and master's and so on, right? And I think same thing in a relationship is like, what degree do you have in your wife? Like at one point I would have been like, I'm a doctorate in the way that I understand my wife. And then in this season, I'm like, I feel like I'm relearning some things. So I don't think you ever outgrow that, just to be very clear. I don't think you ever get to a point where you've arrived, just similar to our relationship with Jesus. But there is an intentionality that comes to that where you're like, hey, I understand just by the way that my wife's face changed, what she's feeling right now. Right. When you're on that level with your wife, or even with your girlfriend or with your fiance, as you guys are moving through those phases, like that is so powerful, because when people, our biggest need, which is why we need the Lord, right? Our biggest need, obviously, in this world is to be understood. We want to feel understood. We want to feel like we could be our most authentic selves, especially in 2022. We want to feel like we could be our most authentic selves in front of anyone that we're around. It is so powerful when you have that with your spouse, when you have that with your wife, where you could have a day and not feel judged for having a day. Right. You could, or even you're having a great day and they meet you at that same place as well. So when it comes to communication, I think the more you learn about her and the more you learn about yourself, even your tendencies, your triggers, the things that set you off, the things that make you happy, the things that, all of those things. My wife knows exactly what my triggers are. I dealt with anxiety. It's much better now, but 2 years ago, even I was like having panic attacks. And my wife could know just by the way we would like go in a grocery store and she would see the look in my eyes and she'd be like, you need to go back to the car. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay. She's like, yeah, we're good. I got the kids, go. And just the way that she protected me in that moment, like that kind of stuff right there is where people be like, man, like I really feel, I really feel so connected to my wife. So continue the conversation, learn more about her in way of your understanding of who she is as a person, learn more about yourself, your triggers, all of those things. And then the last thing I would say in that is heal from whatever you dealt with in your past, because the longer we go without identifying and healing from the things that have messed us up in our lives in the past, the more that will leap into conversations that we have now with our wives. It doesn't matter. You could be talking about deciding what to eat, and that could be the biggest argument ever. Right. Why? Because you guys are processing it very differently. You know what I'm saying? So I think those are just a few things, and there's a lot of great content out there. Just to throw some names out, I said Love and Respect is a good one. Relationship Goals by Michael Todd, I think is really good. And just, you think it's a book about like how to relate to your spouse better, and it's really a book about like get yourself together. Like it's really what it's about. And from getting yourself together, you can be a better husband, spouse, all the things. And then I would say Focus on the Family, just their whole ministry, such good content out there, man, just in things like this. So that's just a few things, but I think learning more, I would say, is probably the biggest one for me. Learning more about her and yourself is going to be so revolutionary to how you communicate.
Yeah, I love the you use the word study, and that's a great example of studying your wife and it's almost like, they always say date your wife, and that's good. I mean, dating is basically studying realistically.
Yeah.
So, yeah, studying your wife. And then you talked about healing. And I think that's one that's overlooked, because when we don't heal from our past, we talked about the baggage from other relationships. When we don't heal, Satan has a way of using that to attack us, and making us, when we're communicating, making us feel like, oh, they're attacking me because they said this like this, when realistically there's just a trigger or pain from the past that we haven't healed. And
Yep.
that's definitely something that I've been more aware of the last couple of years, as I've been studying that, those attacks from Satan, because I haven't healed from in my past.
Yeah. It's so powerful, man. It's so profound when you can identify that, because I think we first of all, I want to offer grace to anybody who may be listening and just, you're like, well, but I've taken like strides to be this person and I'm better now. Absolutely. And I think that's great. And as you're on this journey of healing, like, continue that. Like, I think there's never a point where you're like, I'm all the way put together. I think we're always discovering little nuances about ourselves that are not like God, that we want to literally exchange, our pain for his peace, our insecurities for his security, right? So I think we're always in that, but I think it's profound when you can say, maybe I'm still dealing with X.
Right.
And then allowing God to be like, yes, you are. And then you need to go talk to somebody about that. Go get counseling is a word that we don't like to use.
Right.
Like, because it's relationships with maybe ex-girlfriends or things like that, but it's also relationships with like mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, that friend that burned you 7 years ago, like whatever those things are. Realize, again, I celebrate the journey and the progression that you've made. Realize, though, as we're on this journey of healing, though, all of those things that have affected us in our past will show up in marriage. They just will. That's how we're designed. That's how we're wired. And it's not about being perfect. It's about having awareness, self-awareness of, oh, I got angry in this conversation because when I was a kid and I was 5, that happened to me and I never healed from that. So the little boy inside of Antoine is still trying to come out in those conversations. How do I help that little boy heal in the age that I am now, 31? Like, how do I, and I think it sounds so funny to talk about it that way, because we're not taught that. We're not taught to think of it that way. We're taught that time heals wounds. Right. And we're taught that if I don't think about it, I'm better. And it's like, no, you're better when you admit that it's still affecting you and you choose to intentionally heal from it. So it's so profound, man. I love that you said that.
And that just goes back to the surrender to Jesus. Whatever it is, surrender to Jesus.
Yes.
Transitioning a little bit, we've talked about being in marriage, being single, and now let's talk about talk to men going into marriage. And I was talking with a gentleman a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me he was getting married, and like, good luck. And the only thing that I gave him for advice was, go into it with divorce not being an option.
Yes.
And I feel like that's so it's just not something, everyone wants that out, and there's lack of commitment. And so what would you maybe say to guys that are engaged or about to get married, or very newly married?
Yeah, I would say just that, like, divorce is not an option. Marriage is not 50-50. Marriage is 100-100. I know we put a post out about that as well. It's one of my favorite ones, because I think it sounds good. Like, marriage is 50-50, so I got to bring my half to your half, and now we're whole. It's like, no. Truthfully, we're not whole without Jesus.
Right.
So it didn't matter like what I'm bringing to the relationship if I'm not holding him first. But the second part of that is there's no 50. I'm 100% invested into this. So even when I love you, but I don't like you right now, I still am invested in this. And divorce is not an option. My wife and I, like, that is us 100%. My parents got divorced. I'm a product of a home that, suffered from that, and growing up without a father as well. My wife's parents are still married, and we're both resolute in that sense of like, divorce is not an option. It doesn't matter if we're upset with each other and we don't talk to each other all day. We still love each other. We will still seek to like pursue each other and the best intentions about each other and the best about each other, even in conflict. So yeah, divorce is not an option, man. Absolutely not. And if you go into it with divorce as an option, you will find a way out eventually, because that's just what we do. If I have that thought already in my mind, then the first time listen, this to me is so profound. We get upset with people about things that we do. So it's like the first time she doesn't serve me in the way that I expected, divorce.
Right.
It's like, absolutely not, because if you haven't done it, trust me, tomorrow or in like a week from now, you're going to do the same thing. So does she get to divorce you now? So I think we have to be very honest about that and go into it with like, yeah, divorce is absolutely not an option. It doesn't matter what the enemy throws at us. And the other side of that is God can heal and redeem anything. I am not advocating for divorce. I am not advocating for infidelity. I'm not advocating for crazy things like that. What I am saying is God is a redeemer, and God can heal and God can restore. By his grace and through his power, he can. So, if you feel like your marriage is rocky right now, and specifically if you're going into marriage and you're having second thoughts, like, again, have those conversations, but go into it with divorce not being an option. Like, it's so powerful, because now you have to actually talk through things. Now you have to actually learn about each other. And what that does is, when moments where the romanticism of the relationship isn't as prevalent, because of your strong foundation that you've done with, we're friends and I don't like you right now, but I still care for you, and like we're gonna push through this moment together, and in sickness and in health, or even if we're rich or dirt broke, doesn't matter, I'm with you. When we have that, there's something within us that strengthens, and you truly get to build this wall against the enemy using the armor of God and using the promises of God, like it says in his word, that it doesn't matter what's thrown at you, you can go through that.
Right.
You can go through the fire, and just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God is with you in the fire. Like, I'm so serious. But that cannot happen if in your mind divorce is an option, or a prenup is an option, or any of that stuff.
Absolutely. I love the example that you said, I love you, but I might not like you in this moment. And that's one thing I've said to my wife before, because there's just been moments where I'm like, okay, we are not on the same page. I love you. Don't like you at the moment, but I love you, and we're gonna get through this. So that was a great example. The one you also mentioned, you talked about how, we might get mad if this person, or, my wife didn't serve me in the way that I wanted her to serve. And I feel like there's a lot of men that maybe bring a more of an authoritarian type of leadership to marriages. And, obviously that's not the most ideal or the best way. So do you have any thoughts on that, and maybe how men can transition from the authoritarian leadership to the more Jesus, the loving and compassion, I should say, leadership?
Yeah, I think it starts with self-awareness, because if I don't think that what I'm doing is wrong, there's no way that I could change it. And even with that, like, that's a very strong statement for me to say. But what I would say in that is, you'll notice the effects of that in your wife, because as easygoing and as social as I'd like to think that I am, I definitely have my authoritative moments because we all are very opinionated and we feel strong about what we feel strong about. And this is right and that is wrong. And it's like, stop, like soften your heart.
Right.
And if you feel like you're a little rough around the edges and you're more authoritative and maybe your wife is not, realize that if you don't choose to intentionally connect with her outside of that, like it will be damaging to y'all's relationship because either she's going to leave or she's going to be a shell of herself. And you don't want that. You don't want your wife to be a shell of herself and not maximizing all the giftings that God has given her too.
Right.
So I would say for anybody who's out there and you realize that you could be a little bit more strong-willed at times and authoritative than you'd like to be, I would just ask the Lord to reveal that to you in the moment. Because I think it's one thing to be like, God, show me. And God's like, okay, but you need to have an awareness of it. So I'd be like, God, a very specific prayer I would pray is like, God, the next time this happens, I want you to immediately bring it to my attention. And then with that, practically again, ask your wife to do the same thing. Hey, babe, so here's one of the things that I'm working on. And I realize that it's not healthy. The next time we're in a conversation and you sense this from me, you have full permission, like, to call me out and it's okay. And I think, listen, and watch her feel so esteemed by that because now she doesn't think you're just like, you don't care, but you care so much that you're now bringing her into it and that you're allowing God to be brought into it as well. That is so powerful. I ask my wife like all the time, hey, here's what I'm dealing with right now. Here's what I'm struggling with. One, can you pray with me and pray for me? But two, next time I'm acting a fool, let me know. Because I don't think we will realize it until we're in the moment. We're going, oh, that's what this looks like manifested in reality. It's not just my mind anymore. This is what the reality of that is. And now I'm seeing the effects of that on my wife or my girlfriend or my fiance in this conversation. So, and the last thing I'll say on this is leaders love. Right. Leaders love first. Jesus, like, it didn't matter what he was doing. If somebody like needed healing, he would stop and he's like, hey, like, your faith has healed you. Especially if like the lady that grabbed his robe when he was walking by, it's like, for him to stop and be like, who touched me? And just to be like, wait a minute, your faith has healed you because you went through all this stuff just to get to me. And I think when we lead with such a posture of love and a posture of compassion, like we talked about before, and a posture of, I don't care even what my emphatic ways of thinking are in this moment. I care about your heart in this moment, even in this disagreement, even in this struggle. What are you feeling? Because that is bigger than maybe even this argument, because the effects of this argument is going to affect our marriage. So authoritative men out there, I feel you. I get it. Like, I would say the same way that you were intentional about going hard after your sports team and being so in tune with that and just being so passionate about that, bring that to your marriage too. Bring that to your marriage and let the enemy not have any foothold to that. The same way that you would go after your team and hard after them, do that for your marriage. Your wife will appreciate it and allow her to be brought into it. Absolutely.
And I love the leaders love. I love that comment. That was absolutely true. Our time is kind of winding down, so I'm going to give you the final word, and just let people know where they can connect with you, and then I'll have you send me the links, and I'll put that in the show notes for the podcast so they can get connected to you there also.
Absolutely. Well, again, like I said, thank you so much for this time. It's been truly fun for me to talk about this. Like I said, Humble Husband was really started out of a burden. And what I didn't say earlier is I actually sat on it for like 6 months because the Lord was just doing some stuff in my own life. So one, it was like, am I prepared to step into this? But the other side of it was I was questioning a lot of things like, is this really necessary? And it was like burden is just the word that I keep coming back to, because it was like I could not help but see it everywhere, and I couldn't help but start. So Humble Husband exists. Like our shtick, if you will, is encouraging men through all seasons of life. That's husbands, that's fathers, that's men, and with a primary focus on marriage, because we realized, Daniel and I, as we, have been crafting a lot of our content, we realized that part of this issue is it's not being talked about. And it's that whole thing of like, you don't know what you don't know. So I don't know if I don't know that I need to be loving, I don't know what it's not or what it looks like when I'm not being loving. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if I don't have those parallels and those contrasts, like, then I don't know what to do. You know what I'm saying? So part of this for us is just, we're talking about it. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about how to be a husband, how to be a man after God's own heart, like David. Like, how do we do that in such a way that's not just a concept that we believe intellectually, but something we can live out practically? So where you can find us on Instagram, similar to like Surrendered Strength, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook. We also have a podcast as well, the Humble Husband Podcast. Season 1 and season 2 are on YouTube. I think we're on iTunes as well. I'll have to go back and double check, but we're definitely on YouTube for sure. And we're looking to do, a little spoiler, we're looking to do a 3rd season here very soon. So, and some of the things that I talked about today, me and Daniel go in a lot more depth on in specific topics. So feel free to check us out. We're just two goofballs, just like goofing around. But what the Lord is doing through that podcast in way of the real issues that we're tackling has been really fun for us. And I think even as we've talked about it, we're looking at our notes, like as we're planning, and we're like, oh my God, like I didn't realize this before even talking about it in this moment. So like, God's working through us as he's working through the ministry. And I think I can't wait to see what God does this year with us. We kind of took a short break because of COVID, just like most people. And now we're back and refocusing and reframing some things. So you can be looking for some cool things in the future with Humble Husband.
Awesome. Thank you again for just having this conversation with me and continuing to help husbands and other men to lead and to honor God as we're called to do. And I think we'll definitely be in touch and be maybe doing some more work in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. This was awesome, man. You have a good one.
Thank you. You too. All right, man. That was Antoine from Humble Husband. So grateful for the conversation that we just had. That was a lot as a husband. And I am, there are some points in there that I need to take away and apply to my marriage. And I encourage you guys to do the same, and definitely check out Antoine at Humble Husband on the podcast, on Instagram, and I will put links into the show notes for that. So again, thank you, Antoine, and thank you all for stopping by and continuing to strengthen yourself so that we can encourage others and honor God.
Thanks for listening to the Surrendered Strength Radio. Connect with me at surrenderedstrength.com. Be sure to share this podcast with other brothers in Christ, family, and friends. Until next time, remain strong, courageous, and honorable, loving God and loving others as yourself.